first time that someone told me that God loved me, I heard it from a Christian. I'm 16 years old, and I was working in this after-school care program at a Methodist church. And there's this guy. His name is Sean. He's gay, he's HIV positive, and he's dying. And Sean turns to everybody who believes that they are not loved by God, kids like me, a gay conservative Jewish kid, and says, you have to know that God loves you. God loves you exactly as you are. And I believed that God hated me. So I so wanted to believe him, but it sounded so Christian. Right? Why is that? Why is it that we Jews treat God loves you as if it were the exclusive property of Christians? Do Jews not believe in God's love? And what happens? What happens to those Jews who believe or have been taught that they are not loved by God when we cede that language to Christians alone? What happens to the kid who ate a cheeseburger on Yom Kippur and believes that he's a sinner? What about the girl who couldn't save her friend from suicide and thinks that God hates her? What about the guy who relapsed on meth and has been taught that God does not love him? Or the person who shops in the wrong section of the department store, so because of their gender identity, our society, our country, tells them every single day that God hates them. What happens to those Jews when on the subject of God's love, we say nothing? Now, I realize that for some of you, it's not yet resonating because maybe you don't believe in God. Maybe you're an atheist. Maybe you're saying this is pretty touchy-feely and it's not me, right? I don't need this message. And that's fair because we don't all crave or need the same thing. And the thing is that someone you know or love desperately needs this message. Someone you know and love has been taught or believes that they are not lovable, and these are the words they need. And as a Jewish community, we are failing them. We are failing them. Because we get that message one of two ways. Either we get it explicitly or we get it implicitly. Some of us get that message explicitly. We are taught that God does not love us. When I was 12, someone told me, I heard it directly, God hates gays. And I believed him. And some of us get that message implicitly, probably more of us. Because we're not talking about it, it just doesn't sound Jewish. And there's this guy named Elliot Eisner, and he talks about a concept called the Null Curriculum. What he means by that is we learn from the absence of what isn't taught, right? So if as father or rabbi or teacher I never talk about sex, you learn that sex is taboo or other or untouchable, right? And the same is true in the Jewish community. If we never talk about God's love, then the listener learns that God's love is not Jewish. Now, I got that message both ways. Implicitly, because no Jew ever said otherwise, I didn't get the love I needed. And a couple years later, after I first met Sean and knew that this Christian guy believed God loved me, I went on a trip to Israel with a group of peers. And we're walking through the Negev desert, and there's this guide. He's older, he's kind of stooped over. And he says that everybody's going to get an opportunity to meditate and that it will be very spiritual. And he says, let the desert speak to you. And I'm kind of a rule follower, so I did it. And I stood there in the desert and closed my eyes and said, God, I'm gay. Please love me. And this wind came out of nowhere. And it swept around my body and embraced me in a way that was so irreducibly real and I never questioned again if God loved me. I so wish I could bottle that experience, that memory, and implant it in the heart of someone who believes themselves to be unlovable. And I can't. Because the truth is, not everyone gets the desert moment. Not everyone comes to that place of that personal experience. And if they don't, here's what's at stake. I think one of three things. When Jews who need to know God's love don't get it, one of these things happens. Number one, they believe they are lovable, so they leave. Because there are plenty of spiritual communities that talk about God's love every day. So if I'm not getting what I need at home, I'm going to walk. Option number two, they stay and they walk through Judaism, but it means nothing to them. Because ultimately the thing they need most, they're not getting. And option number three is that they believe they are not lovable. They believe that God doesn't love them, and then they die. They die physically or emotionally or spiritually, but when we learn that God does not love us, we die. And when I was 17 and I'd come back from this Israel trip and I knew this Christian guy believed that God loved me and I knew that I felt it in my body, but I still had no Jewish vocabulary, I chose a fourth way. I spent the last 17 years searching, looking for an authentic Jewish language of God's love. And it's there. When we open the Siddur, the prayer book, every day we say, Ahava Rabba Avtanu, God loves you with a great, endless love. And it's not just in the prayer book, in the Torah. In Deuteronomy chapter 7, the question is asked, how do we know that God that God chose the Jewish people? Is it because we're so great and strong and mighty or wise? Not so much. It's because God is in love with us. It's because God loves us. And then the prophet Yirmiyahu takes it to another level, says, actually, you have to know that God loves you like a parent loves a child. And we quote him on Rosh Hashanah every year for a reason, because we need to hear it. Haben yakirli, you are precious to me. I love you. No matter what you would do, I will always love you. And not just like a parent to a child, but peer-to-peer love. Shir HaShirim, the scroll of Song of Songs, is about an allegory of God's love with the Jewish people. It says God is knocking at the door, knocking, saying, I love you so much, won't you let me in? And it's not just in the Tanakh. When we turn to the rabbinic tradition, really the corpus of text which forms the spine of the Jewish people, right there in Pirkei Avot, Rabbi Akiva asks, how do we know that God loves us? Meaning, he takes it for granted that God loves us. Right? And how do we know it? Because God created us in the image of God. So just as God would love God's self, God loves us. And when we put on our tefillin, those phylacteries, the leather straps that traditional Jews might put on in the morning for prayer, what do we say? We say the words of the prophet Hosea, I betroth myself to you with love. And the Talmud in Tractate Brachot asks, so listen, we know what's in our tefillin, but what does God wear in God's tefillin? Which is such a Talmud question, right? Right? Love it. And the Talmud answers its own question and says, in God's tefillin it says, who is like you, O people Israel? In other words, there is none like you. I love you. I am uniquely in love with you. And to my mind, some of the greatest riches are actually when we turn to the annals of Jewish philosophy, to the great existentialists, Martin Buber, Franz Rosenzweig. What do they say? They say that to be Jewish is to be in relationship with God, to feel God's love, and to love God back. That those desert experiences, if you've had them, they're real, and you can trust them. And then Abraham Joshua Heschel goes a step further and says, the notion of God as proposed by Aristotle is the unmoved mover. The antithesis of that is the Jewish God. God is the most moved mover. God is moved by us. God is in love with us. So Jewish community, let's cut the crap. God loves you is Jewish language. It always has been. And we're going to have to get used to saying it, even if it feels awkward at first, because the stakes are too high. Someone you know and love has never heard this. someone you know and love, believes that she is not worthy of God's love. And so we have to get used to turning to each other and saying, I know no one may ever have said this to you. And I need you to know that our tradition teaches unequivocally that God loves you exactly the way you are. And if it's you, if you've been taught or you've come to believe that you are unlovable, it's time to reclaim what was always yours. But the deal is, we don't unlearn what we've been taught by accident. We unlearn what we've been taught by action. We have to fight for it. And this is worth fighting for. God loves you is our sacred inheritance. Take it back. It's worth it. Ahava Rabbah Avtanu, God loves you with an endless love. In God's eyes, you have always been loved. God loves you. God loves you endlessly. God loves you just the way you are.